Just this last month, I've had 5 different pastors who reached out to me in our ministry with the exact same story. Every single one of them in their early 40s, done about 15 years of really hard ministry. And every one of them contacted me after they had been to the hospital, the ER, because they were having panic attacks. They were in their early 40s and had never had a panic attack before. They didn't even know what it was. But something broke in them, and it was all around the same time. I actually wondered if they were playing a joke on me and they knew each other and they were all calling me within a few weeks of each other. But they didn't. The same thing was happening to each one of them. After serving in hard ministry over a certain amount of time, not knowing how to care for their own soul, their bodies just started to break. Many of them went to the ER because they thought they were having a heart attack, and their wife took them to the ER and their heart was fine. They were diagnosed with having panic attacks over the accumulated stress. Some of them were diagnosed with battling depression in the midst of all of that, and many of them had to take medical leave from their churches. I deal with this all the time. And I wonder if some of you watching this are in the middle of dealing with these kind of things also. It's why we want to take some time to talk about depression, anxiety, even suicide among pastors. Yes, it's a real thing, and we've all heard the stories. And I deal constantly with pastors who this is how the stress of ministry shows up in their life when they don't know how to diagnose what's happening in their own soul. It's important that we talk about these things, and it's important to talk about how do we identify it and how do we get help. This is a big part of caring for our own soul. When the dark night of the soul, as Spurgeon would refer to it, hits us as pastors, there's a lot of pressures around us not hitting those places. We're supposed to have it all together. We're not supposed to battle things like everybody else. But you and I both know we battle things just like everybody else. And I want you to know it's okay. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to battle anxiety, even to battle suicidal thoughts. But it's really important to get help when you're in that place. I want us to look at a passage that we looked at in a previous session, but I think it's very applicable here when we're talking about these very serious matters that can overtake our soul and our life. 2 Corinthians 12. I'd like to read about the thorn in Paul's flesh once again, where Paul begs God to remove this thorn. 3 times remove it from me, and God doesn't, because he shows that God has purposes in that thorn in Paul's flesh. And I think you will see an instant connection when we start talking about emotional struggles like depression and anxiety and even suicidal thoughts, the things that revolve around the dark night of the soul that we will kind of refer to it as. Chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians, starting in verse 7, Paul's writing and he says this: "So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" We don't know what this thorn was in Paul's flesh. But Charles Spurgeon would say the thorn in his flesh, in the midst of all the different suffering that he battled, was depression. Spurgeon wrote constantly about this ongoing battle with depression that he had. And we can see that that is a thorn in the flesh of Spurgeon's life that God used in immense ways. Because Spurgeon is known as this lion of a preacher, an amazing leader, and the prince of preachers he's called. And yet, imagine Spurgeon, who preached to tens of thousands of people, within hours is also crying in a corner uncontrollably and has no idea why he's crying in that moment. There's a lot of pastors that battle this dark night of the soul. And Spurgeon was one of the ones that battled it constantly. And yet, it's the thorn that God used in his life to make his ministry that much more powerful. And that's the main idea I want us to see here as we consider these issues, is to identify them, to know it's okay to have these struggles, how to get help, but also that we can have hope in seeing the providence of God in how he works in these different aspects of our lives. All 5 of the pastors that reached out to me recently having panic attacks, God is working in each one of their lives in some really amazing ways by his grace. And a big part of it is how he's using them and their struggle and their weakness to learn how to care for their own soul better so they potentially can continue on in the ministry and thrive. But there's definitely reasons that pastors ignore when this is happening to them, when depression hits, when anxiety and even panic attacks hit, when suicidal thoughts come. A lot of pastors just want to put their head down and ignore it and keep pressing through, but I want to caution you to not choose to do it that way, but to actually seek help, to not ignore it. But I do want to highlight reasons that pastors do ignore this, because you may be fighting this even as we're speaking. Here's one reason pastors ignore this reality of the darkness of the soul. We feel the pressure to have it all together, so we have to act like we're fine. You ever felt that pressure before? You feel this darkness, you feel this discouragement, this loneliness, and the darkness just doesn't lift. But you feel the pressure to show everybody you still got it all together. Like you don't think you can battle these things like other church members battle them, so you hide them. You don't share with people what's going on. And I want to encourage you that it's okay to acknowledge these things. It's even good. But we will ignore them if we feel the pressure to let people know we have it all together and we're not supposed to struggle that way. There's another reason we ignore dealing with this reality. We are not honest when the darkness comes and it doesn't leave. And I think we need to acknowledge we all have discouraging times. We all feel melancholy and low. But what happens when that darkness, that melancholy, that discouragement turns into despair? And from despair, it turns into even thoughts of hurting ourselves, and we don't reach out for help. Oftentimes, we still try to ignore it. Oftentimes, we've pressed through the discouraging times, and maybe we're able to keep on, but there's a time that comes where it doesn't work that way anymore. The darkness comes, and it doesn't lift. And even though we need to do something about it and get help, we ignore it. And that's one of the ways that pastors will try to ignore these things. We're shamed to struggle this way, so we don't ask for help. It's another way pastors ignore this darkness of the soul. And here's one of the more dangerous aspects to ignoring this. We think success and busyness in ministry is the cure to our depression. We think if I'm just successful, it'll fix my anxiety. If I can just achieve this in my ministry, then I won't have these thoughts of harming myself like I feel like I have now. That is a very dangerous way to ignore the realities of the darkness of the soul. But many pastors are ignoring it in these ways. So how do we address it? How do we get help? Which is really what I want to emphasize. If any of you are feeling these ways, to not suffer in isolation and being alone, but to get help. And I want to talk about maybe what we can do on how to face the darkness and to do it with courage and do it with hope. First thing we have to do is we have to remember this hard, unique work can be magnified to an already troubled soul. And what I mean by that is ministry is just uniquely hard. It just is. There's challenges and pressures that a lot of other people don't face. And when pastors carry the burdens of other people and we carry our own burdens, and that a lot of times can be overwhelming and lead us to these places. It can lead a 42-year-old man to experience a panic attack for the first time in his life because it just finally breaks him, all that pressure. So we need to remember this is a unique work. And if we already have some of these battles and struggles, ministry will only just heighten that reality. And we need to be mindful of that and sensitive to it as we continue in the ministry. We also have to be honest with where we are, not where we think we should be. You ever done that? You ever beat yourself up when you're in this dark place and you just beat yourself up with more guilt and shame because you shouldn't be here? You're a pastor. You're supposed to have it all together. You're supposed to know Jesus better than anybody else. You're not supposed to have these kind of struggles. And we beat ourselves up and we just live in the guilt and shame of where we think we're supposed to be. But I want to encourage you, accept where you are. It's okay. God in His grace meets you exactly where you are. And that's one of the ways that we move forward in dealing with this, is to simply accept and be honest where you are and know it's okay. We also have to ask for help from somebody who's a safe person and can honor the confidentiality of that. It's another reason why seeing a professional counselor as a pastor is so valuable, because they're sworn to confidentiality. There's somebody you can go to and speak open and honest and have a safe person to be able to share whatever's going on. But you need to also find a friend or somebody in your life that is safe, that you can share these hard things with. I'm grateful for the ministry I get to do in caring for pastors. But there's part of it that makes me sad, because if a pastor is reaching out to me who he doesn't know and he just follows our ministry, it means he doesn't have anybody in his life personally to be able to reach out to, which we then try to connect him with somebody who's near him. If you have somebody that you know is safe and can hold confidentiality, seek them out for help. One final way we can pursue this is to trust God has good plans for all of us with whatever thorn is appointed to us. Let me personalize that. God has good and kind plans for you in whatever thorn in the flesh He's given you to enhance your ministry. It'll take faith to believe that, but He promises to do that. And I want to encourage you to trust in that in the midst of all these ways to try to seek that help. So when the darkness comes, what is it that keeps you from asking for help from others?